back to Sky's Review Desk. So today we're gonna do a reviews on the KEF R3. So today we're gonna do standalone reviews on the KEF R3s. You know, in my previous couple videos, I've been mentioned about the KEF R3s. Today's finally the KEF turns. I was thinking to do a KEF R3 comparison to the LS50, but after I think about it, I kind of think that the R3 is kind of worth by itself as a review. And later on I was still going to do a comparison between the R3 and the LS50. If you're interested to that, subscribe my channels. So some of you might know KEF, they have like a lot of different lines. They have the Q series, the R series, and the reference, and then the more expensive, the blade, and so on and so on. They also have like tiny little one, the LSX, and also the EDGE Duo. So the R series is the highest that KEF offer that's made in China. What this means is like this is the last levels of speakers that's made in China, and after that it's all gonna made in UK, which is the reference and the blade and the more higher levels speakers. On the KEF R3s, these are their 12th generations Unique drivers, and near the Unique drivers you can see KEF call it shadow flare. So it's this area right here, the white thing around here, and for me it's more like a waveguide. This design was originally from the reference, and then they kind of use it down on their R lines. So the goal of that is trying to make the R series as close as to the reference. And according to the KEF, on the R series there are like 1,002 changes from previous R series, which is the R300s. But I didn't have the previous R series, which is the R300, so I cannot really tell the sounds differences between the R300 and the R3. But I do see a lot of people on some of the forums said that the new R series do sound a lot closer to the reference levels. And on their R series, the bass drivers, you see that I would say the silver gray here is aluminum drivers, and inside of the aluminum driver they put a paper cone inside. The bass has the speed and the punch on the aluminum driver, and then with the extra paper cone inside it will add a little bit of naturalness. And also on their back you will see their flexible port, which is they got it from the LS50. I think after the KEF engineers, when they see that flexible port on the LS50 is really working, and they kind of now implement to their R series and also the reference. All of them, they're using their flexible port. And the build quality on the KEF R3 is, in my opinion, really solid. Inside of their cabinets, they have a lot of bracings. For those of you, if you don't know about like bracing, they use it to reduce the vibration of the speaker or of the cabinet, because when the speaker has vibration it will affect the sound. So on the KEF side, they're trying to minimize the vibration as much as they can on the cabinet buildings, so that they can achieve a more accurate sound, or they will say a less color sound from their perspective. And on the R series, they do come with the microfiber grills, but I didn't use it. I just keep them in the box because in my opinion I just kind of want to show off the whole drivers, especially the Unique drivers. So for me, I didn't want to hide it. I just want to use it. I don't have a child, so they won't like poke the drivers and everything, so I'll just leave everything shows. And on the microfiber grills from the KEF ends, they do claim it shouldn't affect the sound, but in my opinions, I would say just tiny little bit. It's really minimum. It's like 2 to 3%, I think. It's really less, but I can tell it's slightly roll off the high frequency a little bit. So if you found that it's too bright, you can, put the grills on. It will minus that a little bit. And on the spec rise on the KEF R3s, their 8 ohms sensitivity is 87 decibels. So it isn't too hard to drive, but you do need some of the power to make these KEF R3s sound good. So enough for the background of the R3s. I'll just talk about the sounds right now, okay? Since most of you come here for knowing how is my opinions of the R3s. So first, I'm going to talk about the sound stage and imaging on these R3s. The reason I put the sound stage and imaging together, because in my opinions, they are in one. They will affect each other's for the sound stage and imagings. First, let's just talk about the imagings. They are pretty good on the R3s. If I use the S400 from Chord as a reference, I would say if we are talking about in flat imagings, in the previous video I did show a paper that I draw, like this. Talk about a speaker, like these two are the speakers and this is where you're sitting, okay? So what I mean is if you're talking about in a flat imagings, which means just like that, flat imagings, and they're incredible on the R3s. Every instrument layout is perfect on point, and especially on the center vocals, they lock on center. If they're supposed to be in the centers, they will lock it on the centers. The reason I did point out the S400 is the S400s will have a bit of the depth imagings that I think is better than the R3s. I'll talk about that more detail later on the videos, okay? Because for the imaging on the R3, it's kind of depends on your placements. How did you put them in? Did you toe them in, or did you leave them straight to the living rooms? And I found that if you have the R3 toe in, the imaging is, oh my god, it's like perfect. Nothing missed. They'll just be at whatever that should be. But if you toe them in, you will have a little bit less on the sound stage. In my opinions, I prefer them standing straight to the living rooms instead of toe in to your ears. But again, it's just my preference. So you could have different opinions on that too. Because I think on the R3, their image is way too good. It's like perfect. So when you have them straight to the living rooms, it's like you sacrifice like that 2% imagings to gain like about 20% of the soundstage, in my opinions. And it's well worth it, because even you have them towed straight to the living rooms, the imaging is still incredible. But they could be just tiny little bit difference, but the soundstage and everything is just way better. I think it's due to the design of the shadow flare, the waveguide that they design. It just kind of helps out spread the sound to the room a lot better, I think. And since we already talked about, placement would change the sound, all that. And the next thing that I also find it interesting on the KEF R3 is their binding poles. The way that you plug your speaker cable into the binding poles is also affect the sound. At least I found it that way. You could think they're about the same, because the difference is not that a lot, but they does has a difference between that. So the top two here, they are mainly for the top drivers, which is the Unique drivers, and the bottom two The binding post is for the bass drivers, and these two is just the jumper that KEF built inside of the cabinet. Since the top two drivers is for the Unique drivers, that means that if you want more energies on the mid vocals and on the top end, you could just put two of your cables, the red and the black one, just strictly to the top binding post. So the power will first goes to the Unique drivers and then feed back to the bass. So same thing if you want more bass and also you want a bit less energies on the mid driver and the top drivers, you can plug them in the bottom binding post. For me, I will go for more balanced soundings, which is I'll put the red on the top one and the black on the bottom binding post. And in my opinions, I found that the way that you put it like that is the most balanced sound. And for some people that you maybe play around the speaker that have 4 binding posts before, I think there are a lot of people knows that and they usually plug it like the way that I did. For those of you who bought the R3 and think that they're too bright, or you're thinking to buy the R3 but a lot of people think that they're bright, so these could be the method that you can use to, you know, minus the Unique drivers, the powers that a little bit. So first you could put the cover on. Second, just don't hold them in. The third is you plug your speaker cables on the bottom binding post. That will help for minus the powers on the Unique drivers. Again, all these is about personal preference. You know, when you have it, you could just think that the R3 is not bright enough and you want a bit more power out of it, so you could put it just straight to the top, so it will help more energy coming from the Unique drivers. And one more thing that you can play on the back of the binding post is the jumpers, but unfortunately I don't have jumper cables that could use it for like by wire or by amp. So if you have, I guess you have more fun to play around with it. You know, you can test around more different jumper cables. Because when I first had the R3, maybe like a week after, I did borrow my friends a pair of like pretty expensive jumper cables. I forgot the brand. Yeah, I forgot the brand. I don't know if they're Audioquest or something like that. I forgot. And I kind of play around with the jumper cables and with the internal jumpers. They sound to me about the same, so I'll just use the internal, since I bet KEF, if they're trying to put the R3 as close as to the reference, the internal build should be good. You know, because in some of the high-end speakers or the company like KEF, Bowers & Watkins, Hegel, and in some of their speakers they also offer 4 binding posts. And the reason that is they're trying to offer more sound tuning option for their customers. But on the speaker that you have, you will need to know how they design the binding post to better tune it. So for saying that the KEF R3, this one, they only have like the 2 parts. One is the top, which is the Unique drivers, and the bottom is the bass drivers. But if for some of the tower speakers, not from KEF, they could have one of the one is tweeters, one is mid, and then 2 of the bass drivers. So for that instance, you will need to know how they implement those drivers into the binding post, so you will know better how to tune the sounds. I mean, that's also part of the fun that you own the speakers, so that you can play around with the sounds. And now let's go move on to their bass. The bass on the R3, they're punchy, speed, impactful. The bass on the R3, they're really punchy, and in some situations they go down pretty deep. And if you guys have watched my previous video about the comparison on the R3, the S400 and the Commodore, I did mention that the S400's bass is different than the R3. In my opinion, the R3 has more impact and the punch, and they feel more solid to me. But I would say like they're not as clean as S400, but the R3 has a bit of the naturalness with it. It's like on the S400s, the S400 can reproduce some of the lower frequency bass pretty clear. So the bass on the R3, when it hit, you will hear the bass that give you the speed. The meantime, it will also come with a little bit of the naturalness. So some of the bass, when you go speed, like boom, like that, it's in and out. But with these R3, they have like a boom. So they have a little bit of like I would call it like bass shadows. Because when you hit it, you will hear a little bit of the bass is kind of slowing down on the end. So for me, it's more natural, but it depends on you. And if you ask me, do I think the R3 needs a sub? I would say yes, because the R3 does have like a lot of punch, but I think they need a little bit of help on somewhere around like 25 hertz to 40 hertz. For me, it just feel like the sound is more complete with a sub on the R3s. Of course, it's gonna be a quality sub, right? And you might ask like, what about the S400s? Do I think that they need a sub? And in my opinions, yes, but the purpose of needing a sub is different. Because the S400 can produce like a noticeable bass that, around like 30 to 40 hertz, but the quantity is not enough, I think. I mean, you could tell those bass is for those hertz, but they're just kind of peeking out. They cannot let you like enjoy the full bass sounding that was supposed to go with the sound. So I would say it's not punchy enough. The amount of bass is not like good enough in my opinion. So for S400s or the R3, they both still need a sub, but the purpose of it is different. So for the overall sounding on the R3, they are really neutral speakers, but in a good neutral way. Because some of the people would think that neutral speakers usually they're boring. But these, in my opinion, are not, because I do own some of the neutral speakers that's boring in the past. And there are one speaker that is remarkable boring in my opinion. So I kind of remember that, which is the Audio Engines A5. I have that speaker maybe like a long time ago. I use it as the desktop speakers. But man, if you guys have listened to that speakers before, you know what I mean by boring in neutral. So the R3 is in a neutral way, but a little bit of laid back. And what the R3 is trying to do is they're really trying to reproduce what the recorder wants, or what the sound's supposed to be from the studios. In most of the song I've listened to on these speakers, it's like around 80% of them, they're like flat reproductions. So you guys remember that paper, the sheet? They're just like flat layout with all different instruments that's laid out flat in front of you. And also, they can also, the R3 can also kind of let you know what kind of environment when the song is recorded at. Because some of the song they could record it in a live place, which is not like a recording studios. You will find some of the echo, or for example, even a live concert. You can really tell the difference. I don't know if I can get it clear. Hopefully you guys can understand what I'm saying. And in my opinions, if a speaker can show like different sounds environments, like some of them they record it in a live hall. When the R3 plays it back, you can really hear there's a lot of different depth imagings and layers on the sound, just like the S400 did. But on the R3, unlike the S400s, the S400 will show that depth layer on every single song. I mean, like, not every single, but most of the song, because in my opinion, I think this is their sound signatures. You know, different companies will tune their speakers differently, so they will have their own sound signatures. But for me, S400 is kind of use the depth layers on every single songs or sound they're playing. But the R3 is, I would say, maybe more accurate, because I'm not sure, okay? Because it kind of showcased to me that the speaker like can show you if that song is recording live, or if in a huge space or huge room that has echo to travel around. But in some other cases, if it wasn't recorded that way, they would still show it, just reproduce the sound in a flat imaging instead of like they have like a different layers. And if you ask me, what about, does it have the tonality like the triangles? To be honest, no, because you know what KEF aiming is to the more neutral sound, less coloring sound. I mean, there's always something that one speaker is good at, the other don't. Like the triangles, they're good at instruments. The tonality is amazing, something like that. I mean, I bet who doesn't want a speaker that can do everything, like tonality, imaging, soundstage, depth layer, vocals, musical, all of them in the same times. And at the meantime, can also be as neutral for movies and has a great dynamic. I mean, it's kind of hard to find a speaker that can fit everyone's, because there are always people want something else more than the rest of them. And that's the reason why there are so many different speaker company introducing their own type of sound, or their own version of the good sound. So at here, I would say call it about an end for the R3 reviews. And for those who really wants to know how's the R3 sound different to the LS50, stay tuned for that. I will talk about it in the next videos as a comparison of the LS50 and the R3. Until then, see you guys next time. Stay safe. Bye.